Okay, so have you ever, like, really thought about it? How humans went from living in caves to, building these massive cities and sending rockets into space.
It's wild, right?
Yeah, and it's all because of this one thing, and it might seem kind of surprising.
What's that?
Stories.
Stories?
Yeah, stories, like shared myths. That's what Yuval Noah Harari argues in Sapiens. And, that podcast discussion you sent me about his book, well, it really digs into this whole idea, and I gotta say, it's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, it really makes you rethink, like, the whole narrative of human history,
Totally. So, like, imagine early humans just chilling around a fire telling each other stories. Seems pretty basic, right?
Right.
But Harari's saying that those stories, those shared myths, they were crucial to our species' success. They allowed us to cooperate in ways that other species just couldn't.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about, like, being physically stronger or faster. It was this thing Harari calls the cognitive revolution. This period around 70,000 years ago, that's when things really took off for us,
Yeah.
We developed language, yeah. But not just like simple communication, like complex language. And that allowed us to think in these abstract ways and, crucially, to believe in things we couldn't actually see or touch. Gods, nations, even money.
So it's like money itself doesn't have any inherent value, right? It's just a piece of paper.
Exactly.
But because we've all agreed as a society to believe in this, like, shared fiction, it has power.
Right, and what's really remarkable is how these shared fictions, they allowed us to organize ourselves into these really complex societies.
Give me an example.
Okay, well, think about, like, the Roman Empire.
Right.
It wasn't just their armies, right? It was the shared belief in Roman law, the Roman gods, the whole idea of Roman citizenship.
Right.
These were incredibly powerful, unifying forces that held everything together.
Just like today, our modern world, it runs on these collective fictions.
Totally. Companies, religions, political systems, they all depend on this shared acceptance of, like, certain ideas and narratives.
Okay, but it wasn't all, like, smooth sailing from there, was it?
Yeah.
I mean, the podcast we're looking at really gets into the whole agricultural revolution, and it's not always presented as this purely positive thing.
Yeah.
In fact, Harari calls it history's biggest fraud,
Oh, wow.
which is a pretty bold statement. I mean, what makes him say that?
Well, it's easy to assume that, like, agriculture was just this obvious step forward, right?
Makes sense.
It led to larger populations, permanent settlements, and, eventually civilizations. But all this progress, it came with a cost. Hunter-gatherers, they might have actually had more varied diets and even more leisure time.
Really?
Yeah, and then with agriculture, suddenly you've got longer working hours, people become more reliant on a limited number of crops, and then there's the whole increased susceptibility to famines and diseases and...
It's like we traded freedom for security, but maybe we didn't get a better deal in the end.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, and it's not even just about the actual growing food part, you know what I mean?
What do you mean?
Well, the agricultural revolution, it kind of had these huge ripple effects on, like, everything. Social structures, politics, you name it.
So this one shift, going from, like, hunting and gathering to farming, it totally reshaped human existence.
Totally.
Mm.
And it really makes you think, right? Like, what if things had gone differently? What would our lives even be like today?
Yeah, it's kind of a mind-blowing thought experiment,
Totally. And it reminds us that history, I mean, it's not just this straight line of progress, right? There were all these choices, these different paths we could have taken. But here's the thing, right? Even as societies became bigger and more complex, even as we went from those small hunter-gatherer bands to these massive empires, one thing stayed the same.
What's that?
That core human ability to believe in these shared stories and these collective fictions, it never went away.
Oh, right. Like you were saying before about the Roman Empire.
Yes.
It wasn't just their military strength. It was the stories they told themselves about, like, who they were and what they believed in.
Yeah.
It's like you said, these shared fictions, they were the glue that held everything together.
Yep.
And speaking of shared fictions, there was this line in the podcast that really stuck with me about money. They called money humanity's most successful fiction.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It's kind of a scary thought when you really think about it.
Well, it is, right? Because it shows how much of our world is built on these ideas, Money at its core, it's just an idea. But because we've all agreed collectively to believe in it, it has this immense power.
Right. And it's not just money either, right? This whole idea of shared fictions.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, think about it. Religion, nationalism, our legal systems, corporations, They all rely on these shared narratives, these agreed-upon realities.
So it's like we're kind of trapped by these stories we tell ourselves.
Well, trapped might be a strong word, but we definitely can't escape their influence, you know? I mean, they shape how we see the world, how we interact with each other, how we live our lives.
But are all these shared stories bad? I mean, aren't some of them good? Like, what about human rights? Or the pursuit of scientific knowledge? Those are stories we've chosen to believe in, and they've led to some pretty amazing things, right?
Absolutely. You're totally right. It's not about saying all shared stories are bad. The point is to be aware of them, you know, to look at them critically and ask ourselves, who benefits from this story? What are its potential downsides?
So we need to be more conscious of the narratives that are shaping our world and make sure they're leading us in the direction we actually want to go.
Exactly.
You know, it's funny. We've been talking about these shared stories, these big ideas that shape our world.
Right.
And it makes me think about something else the podcast talked about.
Okay.
Science and capitalism.
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
They seem like totally different things, right?
Yeah, you'd think so.
But the more you think about it, the more you realize how connected they actually are.
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of a weird pairing, right? Look,
Totally.
science, it's all about, you know, curiosity and this pure desire to understand the universe, right?
Yeah.
And then you have capitalism, which is like driven by profit and, you know, competition.
Right. Totally different goals.
But somehow they've become totally intertwined, especially in the modern world.
Yeah. And, you know, it kind of makes sense, right? I mean, look at all the amazing inventions and technologies we have today.
Oh, I know, right?
So much of it came from people wanting to, like, solve problems or create something new.
Yeah, yeah.
But also a lot of it was driven by this desire to, like, get ahead, you know, to make a profit.
Exactly. I mean, think about, like, the race to develop new technologies, new medicines, even just new gadgets.
Oh, totally.
A lot of it is driven by this engine of, like, economic incentive.
Right. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's led to some incredible breakthroughs.
Oh, absolutely. But there's a flip side, too, right?
How so?
Well, this constant drive for progress, for pushing the boundaries of what's possible, it can have some, let's say, unintended consequences.
What do you mean?
Well, look at climate change, for instance.
Yeah, good point.
A lot of it stems from, you know, industrialization and this relentless pursuit of economic growth.
Right, right.
And it's not just the environment either. You have economic inequality, the development of, like, weapons that could destroy us all.
Yeah, it's like we're so busy chasing progress that we don't always stop to think about the potential downsides, you know?
Exactly. And that's where I think this whole idea of shared stories comes back into play.
How so?
Well, we have to ask ourselves, what are the stories, the narratives that are driving these forces of science and capitalism? Are they the right stories?
That's a good question. And I think that's a great place to kind of wrap up our deep dive today.
I agree.
You know, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the dawn of humanity to the complexities of our modern world.
It's been fascinating.
It really has.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest takeaway here is that we're not just passive passengers on this ride, you know? We all have a role to play in shaping the future.
Absolutely.
If our species is truly defined by our ability to tell stories, to believe in shared fictions, then we have a responsibility to make sure those stories are leading us in the right direction.
I couldn't agree more.
So to everyone listening, the next time you hear a story, whether it's about the economy or technology or even just like the latest news, take a moment to really think about it.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, is this a story I want to believe in?
Right.
Because the stories we choose to embrace, they have the power to shape the world we live in.
Yeah.
And that's something we're thinking about.